Again, so thanks, Kyle, for the introduction. So just to give everybody a heads up, my name is Vokey, founder and CEO here at BreatheSuite. I graduated from Memorial Engineering in 2019. I did mechanical. Kind of started my degree, typically in the oil and gas space. Definitely, a lot of interest there. Kind of thought that's where I was going to end up. Later towards the end of my degree, started to get exposed to some biomedical type things and landed an awesome role with Bounce Health Innovation, which is kind of the story of how BreatheSuite was born. Pretty involved with student design teams. Going through engineering, was pretty involved with things like student society and going to some of those CFES and ACES events, which was a really awesome experience, and obviously experience with before it was Paradigm Hyperloop, it was Open Loop. There was about 9 of us from MUN that really got Open Loop off the ground. So all of that is an interesting journey into medical technology. Certainly a lot of learnings that were easily translatable, a lot of learnings that weren't, but it's been an amazing journey with BreatheSuite so far, and super exciting for where we're heading as a company going forward. I'll touch a little bit on what it is that we do at BreatheSuite, as well as touching a little bit on just the entire medical device design process. Some of you have likely heard the news that we just received our Fda Clearance a couple weeks ago, which incredibly exciting milestone, again being the first Newfoundland and Labrador company to ever really achieve that milestone. Lots of bumps and bruises along the way, some of which I'll touch on today, but certainly an interesting process to get a medical device through sort of the regulatory hurdles. So I'll touch on a lot of that today. So just to give you a quick overview, so BreatheSuite, we are a connected health company. So what we do is really track and train more effective inhaler usage. So really the stat that we look at is roughly 90% of patients with asthma and COPD actually take their inhalers incorrectly, resulting in less than 20% of that medication actually reaching their lungs. We have a device that ultimately aims to solve that problem by tracking and ultimately aiming to train more effective inhaler adherence as well as inhaler technique. So we track and really gamify 4 metrics of inhaler usage. So inhaler shaking, inhaler orientation, inhalation duration, and press timing, all of which are metrics to take your inhaler correctly and get the medication correct to your lungs. We gamify that in a way of scoring every dose from 0 to 100%. So we tell you, what did you do right? What did you do wrong? What can you do on your next dose in order to get more medication to your lungs? And all of that's sort of built on behavior change science and those techniques within the app to drive better usage and therefore better health outcomes for those patients. We do have onboard memory to save doses when not connected to the phone. We're connected by Bluetooth Low Energy, have sort of a battery inside that's completely non-rechargeable. All of which is built around passive monitoring, so ensuring that a patient doesn't have to add an additional step to their daily routine, but more so actually look at data that is going to be very valuable to them without, again, having to add any additional steps. So that's sort of in a nutshell what we do. We do have 25 full-time employees based here in St. John's. We've got a couple of remote employees in Ontario, California, etc. All of which share our shared value of our shared mission of empowering respiratory patients to enhance their health. So much more to come, much more devices to come, obviously many more digital health solutions to come, but at the end of the day, our goal is to empower the patient, which again I'll touch on as part of this as well. So I'll take a step back and just kind of walk through the process of actually getting a device through the approvals. Obviously the importance of dealing with the patient specifically as part of the design process and getting their feedback in order to do that. I start off here by really defining what is health tech and what is medical technology. And a simple definition is product, services, solutions that use to save and improve people's lives. The biggest difference I think between what we see on a daily basis and what lots of other techs see is that oftentimes we're dealing with a person who is very impacted by the disease that we're trying to manage. It isn't just this software solution that could improve maybe it's workflows or something like that. We're really impacting people's lives, and that's one of the things that we see as a really driving factor to making sure that we're creating the best possible product. Because at the end of the day, it's a person that's on the other side of this equation, and it's a person who's dealing with their own life, oftentimes in pretty severe context that is going to be the one who's benefiting out of it, and that helps us to create just a better product and a better experience for those users specifically. Again, I focus here on some of the differences between, I guess, tech and medical devices. Tech is very famous for sort of the fail fast mindset, where you build something, you test it, you sort of go through that iteration very quickly. And while all of that is still true in the medical device context, it's certainly not as easy. The reason is because, again, you've got a person on the other side, and you've got regulatory hurdles that have real consequences associated with that. So a lot of the hard work with finding what I call product solution fit, that needs to happen before you start building anything, because you really need to understand how are you solving a real clinical need. What is sort of the process that you'll take in order to solve that clinical need, because you don't want to get to the end of this road and then find that there is no market for that technology, or you're not solving a meaningful enough problem to actually make a difference to somebody's health. So the product solution fit really needs to happen at the onset, and that's when you after that get into the things of building your product, clearing your regulatory. I do say kind of finding your product market fit. Some of the sales aspects and reimbursement can certainly come after you get your regulatory, but that should still be, if you're thinking about building a really successful medical technology company, that should be a thought in your head throughout the entire design process, and then making sure that you build that in. I don't touch as much on sort of the product market fit, but more so just like how do you actually build the product that's going to solve the problem that you're looking to solve. Again, similar message. This is really the ultimate product equation for health tech, and how do you prove that your solution solves a big enough problem from a clinical standpoint that somebody is willing to pay for it. So a lot of that comes with product market fit, but at the end of the day, you need to solve something that is impacting somebody's life, and not just a minor nuance. And that's really where health tech differentiates itself from sort of all the other technology companies out there. This is a really interesting design graph, and it's actually directly from sort of the FDA regulations, and it talks about sort of the medical device design process. So you'll notice there's sort of a stepping process here, starting with user needs. So ultimately, at the onset, you need to define, what are the user needs of that specific product, and how do you translate those user needs into what's called here design inputs. Those inputs could be, in our case, the user is already using a meter dose inhaler, and therefore, we don't want them to have to add an additional step to their routine to track, their inhaler usage. So the design input in that context could be ensuring that a patient doesn't have to add additional step to their daily routine. The design process is kind of where you get into, obviously, how are you doing things and all those sorts of things, and then ultimately the output of that is ultimately what's intended to solve the input. The two really interesting boxes here is what's called verification and validation, and these are very common terms used in the medical device approval process, where verification is evidence that the manufacturer made the product right. So whatever your design inputs were, so for example, it could be you want it to have X battery life. That would be considered, you find a battery, you create all those solutions that really solve that problem. Verification is proving that you actually, adhere to the design inputs that you set out yourself. The interesting thing here, again, which is very different from some of the other technology industries, is that validation is proving that you actually made the right product. So your medical device and the output that you created, this entire system or whatever software, whatever it is, that's got to really solve that user need, and that's incredibly important in medical technology, again, because that user need could be very severe. It could be, you're designing a stent for a cardiovascular procedure, and somebody's life could be on the line. And although you may have created a really awesome stent, it might not actually solve the problem of keeping that person alive or solving that procedure. So solving the user needs, again, is a critical proponent of the validation proponent of making sure your medical device does its job. Design steps. So I'll flip through these relatively quickly, mostly because I just want to sort of illustrate sort of the phases that we went through, and just to show that things like BreatheSuite don't just happen overnight. Certainly, lots of steps to get there, and this really talks about the design steps to get your medical device approved. And design and development in and of itself includes multiple different phases that is required to have a human as a part of it, to make sure, again, that you're designing the right product. I'll touch on sort of like the clinical need identification, and this is sort of some of the things that we went through. Obviously we found that a lot of patients were using their inhalers incorrectly. So how do we make sure that that's not just a local problem, that's a worldwide problem? So interviewed over, I'd say 120, 130, physicians, pharmacists, patients from really all across the world, and came to the conclusion that this is not just a local problem. This is a really significant clinical need that happens all across the globe. And peer-reviewed journals illustrated that. Talking to people that have dealt with that in sort of the personal experience, all of those things, I think, were a part of that journey of just validating that inhaler technique and inhaler usage is in fact a big problem, and not just something that is sort of hyper local or something like that. Some of the other bullet points here that are mentioned are, you have to be realistic with regards to regulatory hurdles. Someone with very minimal experience in designing something like a class 3 or class 4 medical device that literally somebody's life is on the line, it's very difficult to do. Not impossible, and everybody's a dreamer, so I won't kill any dreams at anything with like that. But the amount of capital that you need to get something like that to market is substantial. Anything that requires you to go through multi-phase clinical trials, randomized control trials with a significant population in order to get that regulatory clearance, it's going to take a lot of money. So I say that talk to Health Canada, talk to FDA, understand the classification that you are dealing with, and be realistic with your expectations, and try to tackle a problem initially that isn't $1 billion to solve, because you're certainly fighting an uphill battle when it comes to that. That's not to kill dreams. Certainly encourage anybody who can solve some of those severest of problems. It's just about finding the money to do so. Just take a quick break there. So on the regulatory planning side of things, so one of the interesting things with regards to the FDA and Health Canada, you can actually talk to them. I would say not easy, but relatively easily to get a meeting with the people who are actually at the end of the day going to be the ones approving your device, to understand what risk classification does your device fall into. And I talk about the different risk classifications here. Low risk, minimal patient contact, maybe a face shield, a bandage, hospital bed. Most of these are pretty minimal risk in terms of what the impact could be to the overall patient's health. Class 2 and beyond is when things start to become a little bit more severe. So like syringes, surgical gloves, catheters. The BreatheSuite device is a class 2 device because it is sort of patient contact. So we're not only an electrical medical device, but we're becoming really a part of their medication that they're taking on a daily basis. And if we're impacting the way that they're taking their medications in a negative way, the implications of that could be severe. So that's why we are considered sort of a class 2 medical device. Class 3 and those beyond are, again, sustaining and supporting life. So pacemakers, defibrillators, ventilators, all of those, for the most part, are considered to be class 3 and beyond devices, because a pretty high severity of risk if something goes wrong, because somebody's life could be on the line with something like that. I'll touch on it just briefly, but quality management is very important in medical devices as well. Obviously, regulatory risk drives the level of documentation that's required for all of this. These are just some of the standards that we had to adhere to as part of the process. Get your electrical safety. Again, you'll notice human factors is actually a requirement to make sure that you're creating a device that's safe. You need to prove that you didn't just create this in the lab and not test it with any person. You need to make sure that they're a part of that process throughout the entire life cycle of your device as a whole. So this is probably the never before seen, behind the scenes aspects of the evolution of BreatheSuite and what it is that we created. So you can see there's really 4 major steps here, some of which took longer to get to another step than others, but sort of throughout the entire design process, making sure that you're testing with a real person on the other end of it is critical, because if you're not getting that feedback, then you're not going to understand the user needs. You're not going to understand how a user actually uses it. And to be honest with you, every day we're learning something here about how people with asthma and CRPD are using our devices, and continuing to work on additional, whether it's software iterations or those sort of things, to create a better experience for the user. And that lifelong learning from your end customer, your end patient, whatever it may be, is critical to make sure that you're creating the right thing. So starting at sort of proof of concept, this was you can see not a very user ready product yet. Certainly this used like Arduino and all those off the shelf sensors to prove that the technology could work. And keep in mind, this is after that clinical need research had been completed and that we had validated that we're really onto something here and there's a serious clinical need. Now let's try to use all this different type of technology to make sure that it actually works. Kept it very low cost, relied on people like Bounce Elevation, MunMed 3D, Genesis Evolution Program to really validate that we were on the right track in creating something that could actually have a benefit to the patient. Oftentimes, I'll say financially, because that's unfortunately a part of this equation for medical devices, proving that something works in the proof of concept often can be a sort of leverage to talk to some of these funders originally, and say, here's a solution that we have found. We've identified that there's clearly a market opportunity, clinical need for this type of thing, and we've already proved that the solution that we want to implement is physically possible. So all that stuff is good for those types of pitches. Moving into sort of the preliminary design things, it's more than just is it possible at that point. You need to start thinking about where you want to be at the end of this. I bolded risks here because this is when you really got to think about, okay, I kind of understand how I want this product to look, but I don't fully understand the risks of designing my product in this context. So thinking about that in mind also feeds into where you sit on the regulatory classification side of things. So you want to design this with all risks mitigated, and then any residual risks that come out of that are also accounted for in whether it's indications for use, whether it's your user manual, whether it's coaching in an application, anything to really reduce the risk of the patient at the end of the day. That's critically important. Some of the other like documentation style things that I mentioned here, traceability matrix, risk management file, requirements analysis, and all this is just a lot of documentation that you need to make sure is formal, because once you go to do your regulatory submission, you need to illustrate the history of this product and how did you get to the final design that you came to, because again, human factors becomes a critical proponent of making sure that your device does what it says it does and it solves the need of the user. I say as well, this is really the critical stage to start testing with real users, because you're not into the phase of injection molding where things are very, very expensive to change, and you can understand a lot of that user behavior through maybe it's a 3D printed model or something like that, to try to get closer and closer to your final product, really before you go and spend a ton of capital to get an injection molded part complete, all those types of things. So verification and validation. This is the part that puts wrinkles on your forehead. It takes a long time. And hopefully at the end of this includes with a regulatory submission. So you can see here on the left, the detailed design, verification, and validation phase started with a pretty different product again than what you sort of see on the right side. Now, I guess relatively different in comparison to sort of phase one. And this is really where you start to prove, first of all, is your device safe? Does it do what it's supposed to do? And does it really solve those needs? So this is when you would kind of do a formal usability evaluation. So, formal human factors testing with people, proving that, again, they're able to complete the tasks that you think a person would be able to do through just, your product, just your user manual, all those types of things. And during this process, we tested with a lot of people, of different, disease states, different ages, and we learned a ton throughout that entire process. And that doesn't even include, other clinical trials or maybe pilots that we had ongoing at the time. At the end of the day, we learned a lot, and this really concluded with the regulatory submission. So only took about 2 minutes to talk about this phase, but it took a long time. And it will always take a long time the first time around, but then, once you go again and again, you understand that process and how to do that much quicker. So overall, what did we learn? If you look back to sort of phase one and the proof of concept, pretty much all our assumptions on, how a user would use this were wrong. And that's oftentimes going to be exactly the case. But the important part was that we were listening to the role of the human throughout the entire process, and informing that in sort of our design decisions to make sure that, again, we're creating a product that's going to be the most beneficial for those people with asthma and COPD at the end of the day. So, I think the biggest takeaway of all this, and certainly I'll open it up to some Q&A, the patient or the user really dictates your product's success. It doesn't matter if you're doing medical technology. It doesn't matter if you're doing any other type of technology. The voice of the user has to be very loud in any project that you do, because they're going to dictate how successful it is. Obviously there's those sort of medium weight bearing assumptions that you'll need to make in order to move the product forward. But you need to make sure that you're able to sort of switch your approach based on some of the things that you're hearing from real users, real patients, real people, etc. So if there's any takeaway of this, regardless of medical technology, again, talk to people, talk to your users, understand their journey, understand why they have the problems that they do, and then build that into your product roadmap, and ultimately try to solve that real problem that they're illustrating to you. So that's pretty well it. Hopefully this was tried not to go too much into detail, but certainly happy to answer any questions with regards to medical technology, or really just with regards to being an entrepreneur and the trials and tribulations associated with that. So appreciate everybody's time for joining.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Brett, for giving that presentation. It was really great to see kind of like how the medical device process differs a little bit from how a regular product might be developed.
Mm-hmm.
So to our attendees out there, Brett's on the line with us for the next little bit. I encourage you to ask any questions you might have, and remember, I can promote you to be a panelist, so you can ask that question to Brett directly on camera, or if you'd rather, you can just kind of type your message out to us in the chat. But to keep things primed up while we're waiting for some questions to roll in, Brett, what was the most challenging part for you about getting started with this? Where did you kind of come up with the idea for BreatheSuite?
Yeah, so BreatheSuite sort of was born through that entrepreneurial sort of internship, I guess, I had with Bounce Health Innovation, where I was exposed to a number of different problems within the healthcare industry. Inhaler technique and inhaler usage being one of them. But that was just sort of the primer. Where it really started to develop, like I mentioned, was talking to all of these people, and finding that it wasn't just a local issue that people weren't using their inhalers correctly. This is a global problem, and the global standards boards for asthma and COPD management talk about inhaler technique in those sort of standards. So that was sort of the start of really starting to figure out, okay, this is a true problem, and there wasn't really anything on the market that would solve it. So I would say the biggest challenge throughout the whole starting process was just figuring out how to do it. And I'm sure I'll say the same thing in 2 years' time. But like starting from scratch and seeing this huge hill to climb of FDA approval or FDA clearance, that's a big hill to climb. And I think that understanding the bite-sized chunks and the medium steps to get to that took some time and took a lot of mentorship from other people who really understood the industry. Yeah, super long process, but lots of learning for sure.
Okay, great. We have a question from Mark in the chat. So Mark says, you mentioned testing on a variety of people with different conditions. Did you have to test with a variety of inhaler types as well? And how about ones from outside of Canada? If so, were there any unforeseen difficulties with that?
Absolutely. So we did have the test with other inhaler types too. So we're compatible with about 90% of the meter dose inhaler market. So your typical Ventolin and Flovent and Advair, and I know that probably doesn't mean much to folks, but these are the common types of medications that are delivered through a meter dose inhaler. And we had to verify everything using all those inhaler types as well. As for testing with people, our submission to the FDA actually did have to include testing on U.S. participants. Oftentimes because there are differences in our healthcare systems and participant populations that may seem minor, but in the way of somebody's using a device could be impactful. So we had to go through multiple stages of testing with U.S. people, and continue to do so even post FDA clearance.
Great, thank you, Brett. Mark, I hope that answered your question. But if you have a follow-up, just ping us again in the chat, okay? While we're waiting for some more questions to come in, another primer from me over here, Brett. How do you feel your business is different from other businesses that students might have a work term with? Mm-hmm. In their experience, either in a co-op education program like engineering or computer science or something like that? What would you say would be the biggest draw working in the tech industry?
Yeah, I mean, the tech industry in and of itself, like all tech companies that are here locally, they're not just hiring for the sake of hiring, and I'm not suggesting that anybody does that, but I certainly know that you work for some of the big tech companies that are here locally. You're going to be working on something that really makes a difference to that company, or else they wouldn't be posting for those positions, and that's the difference between a high growth startup that's obviously every dollar that we spend matters in order to create the most value. If we didn't need a co-op position, we wouldn't post it. So that's just the reality of working on something that really makes a difference, which is, I think, very consistent with any tech company that you work for here in Newfoundland. I will say, sort of beyond just tech and looking at BreatheSuite specifically, pretty much everybody who walks through the door, they say that they want to be here because they want to work on something that really makes a difference to somebody's life. And at the end of the day, we have a person with asthma or a person with COPD on the other side of this equation. It's not just somebody on their computer who's using Instagram or using Facebook or something like that. We're actually making a difference to people's lives, and what success looks like for us is success for that person as well, by staying out of the hospital, reducing their hospital visits, reducing ER visits, all those types of things that result in a negative quality of life. We want to achieve that for those people. So I think our mission and our vision resonate well with pretty much everyone who's come to work for us so far, and I think continues to be that driving factor in why we do what we do on a daily basis.
Great. Yeah, Brett, it's great to be a part of something where, you're actually making a difference in people's lives, and I think that people are really being drawn to industries where they can do that. So I mean, I find it really exciting to see tech startups coming out of Newfoundland in general, but to
Hmm.
see more medical device companies showing up as well, where you can be a part of something really tangible that impacts people is got to be really rewarding.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I'll keep mentioning to the folks in the chat. We've got Brett here for another few minutes. So if you have any questions, don't be afraid to put them in there, or let us know you'd like to poke your head up and ask the question over the camera. Um, so the last primer question I have for you, Brett, is was being a member of a student group, Open Loop, was that impactful for you in your decision to start your business, or did the lessons you learned as part of that translate well to when you started out on your entrepreneurship journey?
Yeah, I'm gonna steal a page out of my buddy Adam's book. If you haven't listened already, Tech and L podcast with him, and he talks about that journey and that experience of understanding that you can do something on a global stage. That opened all of our eyes when we went down there. That just because it's an MIT or a Texas A&M or University of Michigan, whatever it is, we were right there competing with all of those huge companies or huge universities. And what that does is create that motivation that you as an individual, me or Adam or whoever it is, can compete on a global scale. And it created that mindset of thinking bigger in comparison to just sort of being not local, but sort of like thinking smaller. And I think that has translated well into all of the other companies that have spun out of that. You've got Collab, obviously, you've got Inspect what they've achieved. You've got BreatheSuite. So many trickle down effects of that, success. And it was less about what I actually learned from an engineering standpoint and more about the mindset that I grew through going through something like that. Just creates that ambition that I think you may not have had otherwise. So super awesome.
That's great. I mean, I'll speak to that a little bit as well. I mean, I obviously am not in the tech industry, but I worked down in the U.S. and I was in a new graduate program with FMC, which is a subsea company, and they hired almost exclusively from Texas A&M. And I was down there with a few other memorial students, and I was pretty, fascinated to see that the memorial students were just as competent as any of those students who went to that big school in Texas. So,
Yeah.
MUN students, we're an interesting breed. We can really excel if we put our minds to it. So it's great to see more of that at home.
Yeah, I think MUN students, Newfoundlanders alike, have like this level of grit. I love that word because it's so important that may not be elsewhere, right? Like a lot of that in you go to a big school, you sort of feel like you've already earned something, whereas locally we have that grit to want to be better and want to be bigger, and I think that mindset alone is amazing for just driving better innovation or whatever project that you're working on.
Right. Okay. So folks in the audience out there, if we have any more questions, now will be your time to post them up. But I'll start by saying thank you so much, Brett, for coming and taking the time to chat with us today. I know that I found it very interesting to understand the process that you followed, and I think that our attendees did as well. And I really appreciate that you took the time to walk us through that. And I'm sure that the folks in the audience had a very valuable experience because of that.